You, of course, know this, but the countries that have really done the best around the world at tackling the pandemic and its economic fallout have got women in the top leadership. That's also true about institutions run and led by women, right?
Well, it is true that in this crisis, women stepped up. There is a famous saying of Eleanor Roosevelt that women are like tea bags. We don't know how strong we are until we are put in hot water.
Ah, lovely.
And in hot water, women do well.
Right. And the longer you are in hot water, the stronger you get. Yes, that's a lovely one. I must remember it. But you know, you've also had a background and training for difficult situations. You had a difficult childhood and tough economic circumstances growing up. You're in fact the first IMF chief to have had a childhood in a developing country, Bulgaria. And you and your family went through pretty tough times. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think people should know that you're made of sterner stuff and that you have a life experience that very few other leaders in global institutions have had or perhaps even understand.
It is true that I had the life experience of many of the countries in difficulties that the IMF is helping. In the 90s, when Bulgaria was going through a transition from central planning to markets, I remember getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to queue for milk for my daughter. I saw my mother's life saving evaporate because of hyperinflation. And all of this taught me two very important lessons. One, to recognize the difference between bad policies and good policies. It matters to have good policies in place. And two, that macro decisions have micro consequences. And we always have to think about how decisions we make impact the lives of people, especially people who have no access in the high corridors of power.
Exactly. And I must say this, it is so important to have somebody who's empathetic towards the poorest in developing countries. And the poorest are going through the most traumatic time in this pandemic, don't you think?
Yes, indeed. And there are two other things that help enormously. One is that I was for 5 years humanitarian commissioner in the European Union. I had front seat in the most dramatic crises like the Haiti earthquake, the floods in Pakistan, the triple disaster in Japan, or the war in Syria, and the refugees that had to leave their homes because of it. And all of this is extremely helpful when you are in a position that deals with crisis, because what it teaches you is, one, anticipate crisis. We are in a more shock-prone world. Two, act decisively. Three, care about the most vulnerable people. And in this crisis, I truly benefit for having lived through this experience.